Yeah, okay. How many of you have already developed something for Joomla? A component, a module, a plugin? Okay, most everybody. Can everybody see me okay if I stay sitting? Okay, because I'm going to use my computer, and it's just easier if I just sit and talk. Are we allowed to close the door? All right. So, when I have asked how many of you developed for Joomla, how many of you have developed for Joomla 3.0? Something you've written has been for the latest version of Joomla. Okay, so less. Really, I talked just a second ago, and that was much more of I stand up here, I run around on the stage, and I talk, and everyone else sits back and listens. I would like in this session that we have a little bit more interaction, so feel free to stop me at any time if you have questions or if there's something I say that you don't understand. If there's any way in which I can be clearer, please let me know. And I'm going to try to get you to interact with me as much as possible because I would love for this to be more of a one-on-one, even though there's more than one-on-one, to make this more of a personal setting than just me talking for yet another hour and you wishing you were somewhere better. So, a little bit about myself. I assume most of you already heard in the topic just a second ago. I love code. I love everything about it. It's just nice and technical. My background is in mathematics, so I like numbers. I like all that geeky, nerdy stuff. I'm the community development manager for Joomla, so I do a lot of traveling. I do a lot of talking with people all over the globe, and I absolutely love that too. I'm on the production leadership team with Joomla, and so we work with the code, release cycles, maintenance, trying to decide what we should include and at what point we should include it as far as new features and things like that, and then also handling issues when they come up, which they never do, right? The code's perfect all the time. So the first thing when developing a component, and I'll give you a little bit of a hint right off the bat, I wrote a series of articles in the Joomla Community Magazine called Writing a Joomla 3.0 Component. So I'm going to go through a lot of things today, but if there's anything that's unclear or if you'd like more detail on it, there is a full series in the Joomla Community Magazine. I did one article per month for many months. And it goes through a lot of some of these same concepts in more detail, very detailed. We take a specific example component and we write it. So rather than trying to accomplish all of that in 45 minutes today, I would refer you to that resource, and I can share the link with you if you'd like that link. I will show you the sample component that we're developing in that system as well so that you get a feel for kind of what it looks like. So the first thing to decide when building a component is setting up your local environment and how you're going to code it. And that seems simple, and it seems kind of maybe a silly place to start, but it's actually quite important because you do have your choices of everything on this list here. Your operating system, I love open source. I'm a real big Linux fan, but as you can tell from my machine, I use a Mac. It's just a beautiful interface, and so I personally, I am developing on a Mac interface, but all the code that I push is obviously to Linux-based machines, and so I do a lot of command line stuff. In fact, I use more command line than I do graphical interfaces these days. And the next step would then be your code IDE, and what you decide to write your code with. There are a lot of good choices. If you like a very robust system, PHP Storm is a fantastic tool. I personally use Sublime Text 2. I tried 3, but 2 still has all the features in it. That's more of a text-based. That's more of just you writing everything out. There are some cool plugins, and I can certainly show you my environment if you're curious about it at all. But you have a bunch of different IDEs. You've got, obviously you've got Aptana and what are some of the old ones? Eclipse. There's a lot of different tools you can use. I know some guys that code straight off of Notepad++. So you can really use whatever really is the easiest for you. It depends on how much extra stuff that you want. PHP Storm has a lot of cool plugins that you can use. Code versioning system, it's important to get that squared away right at the beginning. The big two would be using SVN or Git. And obviously, Joomla as a whole uses GitHub. It's a really nice repository system that if you're using open source stuff, GitHub is free, so it's really nice. And they have some paid plans as well. Recently, I switched to using Bitbucket as my Git system because I can have private repos in Bitbucket without spending any money. So it is important, though, that whatever you decide, have some versioning system in place because nobody's perfect and you're going to mess up. And when you do, you're going to wish that you had a copy of what you just done somewhere. And that's what those code versioning systems are really good for. So definitely take the time to evaluate and figure out what you want to do. I can go into depth on the process of committing and pushing and pulling, but I assume everyone here is pretty familiar with that. You guys know all about how to use repositories and things like that? Nod, shake your head, something. Okay, maybe I'll look at that a little bit later. Okay, and then lastly is the testing environment. It is important that you test your code. You want to make sure that what you write actually works and that it works for people with different environments than what you're running. So it's important. On my machine here, I use VirtualBox, and I set up a lot of different types of machines. So I've got a Windows XP and a Windows 7, and then a Linux and an Ubuntu and a couple other versions as well, just to test to see how it's going to look in different environments. Because if you're writing code that's distributed, you have to think of what are they using when your client or whoever is using that piece of code that you've written, what are they using to look at it in, and is it going to work for them? So it's important to start with setting up your environment, but then the next step is to set up your goals. Can you guys read that okay? Is that cool? Okay. Yes?
David, are you going to explain to us when to develop a component, when to develop a module, when to...
I certainly can do that, yes. Does everyone have a good clarification on the differences between a component, a module, and a plugin? Okay, maybe I'll do that real quick, if that's good. Okay, so component is really the main portion of the website, right? So if you look at the content portion of Joomla, it's COM content, it's a component for handling content. Usually, I think of a component as, if it's a major functionality change or addition to the system, then it's a component. So if I am writing, okay, so I wrote a CRM, it's called Creamery. I wrote this CRM, that's a component, because what I'm doing is I'm taking a major functionality change to the underlying CMS. CRM is a customer relations management. You maybe use Salesforce, vTiger, stuff like that. If I want to modify the output or add to the output of a component or otherwise change content that's about to be displayed or that's about to be saved to the database, that's where I would use a plugin. A plugin is a little bit of code that I'm going to use to make a change or a modification to something that's already existing, usually in the process of an action. Because plugins all run on triggers. So it's going to trigger on content save or on page render. It's going to run that bit of code, that plugin, on a specific action. And so usually a plugin is to accomplish a modification of one kind or another. And then a module is good for adding a little bit of code to the page. It's not necessarily the main portion of the page, although you can have modules that display, maybe a front page slideshow module where it takes up the full front page. But more often than not, a module will be considered something that you are maybe displaying just a little bit of information. You're not necessarily changing the overall structure or the overall purpose of that web page. Oftentimes, it's easy to think of components as the middle portion of the page and the modules as the little things that surround it. But that doesn't have to be the case, of course, but that's usually an easy way to think about it. So what we're talking about right here, you can actually apply these principles to creating a plugin or creating a module. We're applying them to a component because some of the steps, such as interaction with the database, is something that maybe would be used more in a component. Peter had an excellent example yesterday of interacting with the database in a module environment. You can certainly interact with the database in plugins as well. Typically, components are where that's mainly handled. So, once you've set up your environment and you've got everything the way you want it looking and what you're comfortable using, next thing is to set up your goals. What are you trying to accomplish? So the first thing is, what problems are you solving? Why sit down and write this code? What good is it going to do, and why are you going to do it? How long is it going to take you to solve that problem? And are you going to release this commercially or for free? If you are you going to support it? Because writing that code, and I learned this the hard way. Man, I will tell you. I learned, okay, so I found a problem with the way there wasn't really support for something in Joomla. There wasn't a component that did what I thought Joomla should do. And so I wrote this component. I was like, this is awesome. People are going to love this. And I gave it away. I put it up on the Joomla extension directory, gave it away. It started to get downloaded. I was like, see, I knew it. Other people wanted this too. Well, then they had problems, and then they had questions, and then they come to me because, well, you wrote it, fix it. And all of a sudden, my time was fully spent supporting this piece of code that I wrote because I didn't really think through all the way, okay, I'm releasing this, people are going to use it, and then they're going to rely on it, and then they're going to have problems, and they're going to need me to fix it. And I learned the hard way that I need to make sure that I prepare for those long-term support plans. And you can say, of course you can say, this is unsupported, I'm just releasing it away for free. You'll still get emails from people saying, it's broken, fix it. So it's something to consider when you're writing code, especially if you're writing it for someone else or for a different environment. What are your long-term plans? How are you going to support it? And always check, before you start writing something, check to make sure somebody else hasn't already written it. The last thing we need is yet another module that displays the news or the weather. You know, there's plenty of them out there. So don't reinvent the wheel. I'm really big on not wasting my time writing something that's already been written. So if it already exists, maybe they solve your problem for you. Set up your database schema. Okay, so now we're going to actually get into, when I write a component, what's the first thing that I do? The first thing that I do is I look at the database structure that I'm going to need. How many of you are familiar with MySQL Workbench? Sweet. I love that tool. It's free. I would highly recommend it. It really helps to get your mind around the database schema, the database structure of all the tables and the fields, the columns, all that sort of information, how they map, because you can set up your foreign key relations. It's a really nice tool, and it gives you some really good graphical feel for what it looks like. Would you guys want to see it real quick? I will completely run out of time in this session. I know I will. I'm not expecting to get through all of this, so we might as well not worry about it. So, MySQL Workbench allows me to create tables. So I create a table like this, and then down here I can define all of the columns that exist for that particular table. Then what I can actually do is I can set up, let's see if I can find an easy one here. Okay, so here's our cross-reference table. I can also set up my foreign keys so that the email ID of the emails table links to the email ID of the email list cross-reference table. And I use xref for cross-reference because you want to kind of explain where those tables are joined at. So I create all my tables like this structure right here. And as you're doing this, you start to realize what you're doing is, although you're looking at your database table, what you're actually doing is organizing your mind over what all am I including in my component? What all is it going to do? Oh, you guys are going to see my Twitter feed coming in. You get a feel for, okay, how big is this component going to be? And the thing that's important to remember is you want to release a minimum viable product. And now I'm going to get into the business side of things and my business background. Instead of always trying to finish the code completely, you want to get to a product that's releasable. Because if you work to have the complete product, then you're probably never going to release. And if you never release, you're never going to see anything come from your code. So writing the database schema allows you to kind of see how big is this component going to be, what tables do I need. And then what's really cool with MySQL Workbench is you can generate diagrams. So you would just come into, let's see here. I can remember where it is. So create diagram from catalog objects. I've already hit that. I'm not going to click it again here. What it does is it generates an ER diagram like this, and it links all your tables. And so when you have those foreign keys, when you define all those keys, it does all of this for you. I did zero work to get this right here, other than typing in my tables, my foreign keys. I haven't gone through and done primary keys. All I've done is defined the basics. I told the type of it. Okay, so I just did just the bare minimum amount of work because I am a lazy coder. I want to do as little as possible and get as much as I can for it. So this really gives me an opportunity, and you can move all this stuff around. You can see where they all link to. You can track everything. It's just a really cool tool for getting a visual grasp of how everything is joined and how it all works together. What's really kind of neat, and I haven't even tried it with this set here, is you can export, and you can export it as a SQL. So you can actually take this and you can actually create all your exact SQL tables directly from here. So what I've done in the past, and I haven't even tried it on this set here because this actually is a Joomla framework app, it's not really a component, is I can export all my tables with a __, and export all these tables out, and I've got my install script part for my component already generated for me. So it's really nice. So that's my side note real quick on MySQL Workbench. SQL Pro. How many of you are familiar with SQL Pro? Okay, this was a big one. This one's a fun one. How many of you are familiar with PHPMyAdmin? Okay. I used to live by PHPMyAdmin. I used it all the time. And then I found SQL Pro, and I won't touch PHPMyAdmin at all. Because it's page loads. Every time you click anything, you wait for the page to load. And if you're on someone else's server, you're waiting for that page to load before you can actually get to anything. And it was just driving me nuts. And it's just so slow. So SQL Pro is a native application. Okay, so I can set it up, and then you can connect to local hosts, you can connect to remote hosts. See your databases. Let's find one that actually has tables in it. Okay. And it loads everything up right here, okay? And you can make changes directly in line, and as soon as you click off of it, it saves it. As you can see from my initial list, you can connect to remote servers, you can connect to local servers. I don't even set up PHPMyAdmin anymore. All I do is an SSH tunnel into the server, and then I direct database connect from the SSH. So it's the yes?
This is only for Apple. Do you know any alternative for Linux or maybe Windows?
There is one for Linux and Windows. I would have to look it up because I've been using the one for Linux. I can't think of it off the top of my head. I'll look it up, and then I'll tweet it so that everyone can see it. But yeah, there are tools for Linux and Windows that do the same thing. Yes?
This tool is integrated in the multiple workbench.
I'm sorry?
This tool is integrated in the multiple workbench. On the right side.
Yes. Yes, so it integrates with the MySQL Workbench as well. Yes, so it all links together. It's a super handy tool set, and it's a lot faster than PHPMyAdmin, and it's more secure because you can set up a connection to a remote server that you would not even want to have direct database access to, and you can connect through SSH, which is a secure connection, hypothetically a secure connection, and you can actually manipulate the data in a much faster environment than a PHPMyAdmin type of setup. So if there was one thing that you took away from this session, it's using the tools that work best for the job and starting the right way. That's one of the most important, is making sure right from the beginning that you start off well. So I kind of already touched on this. I create the basic tables that I need. On those tables, I create the basic fields, and then I also create the cross-reference tables. And that's kind of what you saw in that rough example for that other system that I'm writing. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set up my structure, the actual files and folders, and I'm going to make sure that I write them in a way so I can use proper loading methods. How many of you are familiar that Joomla now uses autoloading for your classes? All right. So how many of you normally do an include like a JPath include, or just an include once or require once when you write code. Okay. You don't have to do that anymore. You can use the auto-loading feature. And the auto-loading feature is based off of your naming conventions. So you can actually, as long as you structure your naming conventions correctly, you don't have to require once or include once. They will automatically be included. And it includes them when you need them, not all the time, which is super handy for speed. So by creating your basic file and folder structure and by using the proper loading methods, your component's going to run faster. It's going to be a smoother, and it's going to be less lines of code. And once again, I'm a lazy coder, so I want to write as little as I possibly can, and I want Joomla to do as much of the work as I can make it do. So setting up your structure, and I can show you some of that too. I'm going to try to move a little faster just so I can get through this and answer any questions. The next thing I would do is set up my controllers and creating my base controller. Now there's a lot of debate right now on how the best way to set up controllers is. You can set them up based on function, or you can set them up based on data types. So if I set up controllers based on function, that would mean I set up a save controller. I would set up an edit controller, maybe an import controller, and a view controller. Okay, so there's some basic controller setups. That's based on function. The other alternative would be based on data types. So if I'm writing a library system, I might have a book controller, I might have a library controller, something else. Okay, so you understand, right? Data type would be the type of data, and then maybe in my book controller, I have a save book, and I have a load book and an import book. I would have multiple functions inside my book controller. In a save controller, I would have one task. It would just simply be execute. Okay, so my save controller, it only does one thing, it executes. And the reason I have a question mark is because there's a lot of discussion right now on which is the proper methodology to use. Previously, you used one controller per data type. You know, you had an article controller, you had a category controller, and in the latest release, Joomla 3.1, and as you go through the development magazine article series that I wrote on component development, at that time, the prevailing thought was you write it based on function. I have the CRM component. If I broke that down and I did this, I broke it down based on function instead of based on data type, and I ended up with 60 controllers. Because I would have 60 different actions that were unique enough that it wasn't just one action. There were 60 definite unique actions that had to be set up. And as I'm writing the 60th one, I thought, this just seems like it's silly. I just don't know if I think this is best or not. So there is some debate on it, because when you get into larger component systems, it may feel like you're writing a whole lot of controllers. The controllers are nice that way because you can chain them, meaning you can say, execute this one and then go immediately and execute this one and execute this one, because you're running directly through controllers. You're not having to define controller task, controller task, controller task. It's just easier in some regards to do it based on function. So what I would recommend is, as you set up your controllers, you would have to decide how complex of a system are you building, and is it more beneficial, does it make more sense to you to build data type controllers or function-based controllers? I'm not going to say one is right and one is wrong. So if you're interested, you can come and see me, and I can show you the controllers that I've based on single functions and controllers that I've based on the controller.task, which I still really like that convention of use. So once I set up my controllers, the next thing I set up is my views. And you'll notice that I've skipped one in the middle, right? Because we use MVC, Model View Controller, and I haven't even talked about the model yet. I start with the controller, and then I jump to the view. The reason why is because in Joomla, you actually have that kind of model view model deal going on with that html.php. In older versions, view.html.php. How many of you are familiar with that file in Joomla that you put in your views? Okay, so basically, you don't want your controller to handle the actual view display process. You want to off-put that functionality, that processing, into another part of the system. It goes into the view.html.php file. The reason why we call it view.html.php is because you might also have view.raw.php or view.something-else.php. I typically like to use one called view.phtml.php for partial HTML. So it's easy for me to run it through a different view. So raw would output just the raw part of the screen. It doesn't output the component as a whole. So oftentimes, I'm going to create my views and all my different layouts that I'm going to need before I go back and create my models. So then once I've set up my views, then I go and set up my models. And so then the question becomes, well, what does the model do? Okay, so in a correct coding structure, your controller handles bossing everybody else around. It says, you go do this, you go do that, you give me this, you do this. The view just says, tell me what to show. That's all it does. Tell me what to show. I'll show it. You give me anything you want, I'll show it. The model is where your functional requirements come into place. This is where the model will do stuff, and typically the first thing everybody says, oh, that's where it runs and grabs stuff from the database. Well, the model does all of your functional stuff. It doesn't care where the information comes from. The controller can say, do this, and the model just does it. It doesn't matter. It doesn't care who told it to do it. It just runs when it's supposed to run. If somebody comes up and says, do it, they do it. They don't care who you are, they ask them. Okay? So the model just handles all the functional aspects of it. Then you base your models on those functional aspects. So if you have a book system, the book model is going to handle getting a book. It's going to handle getting a whole bunch of books. It's going to handle throwing a book away, deleting a book, adding a book, all that type of functionality. That's going to be handled by the model. The model actually does the code. The model doesn't care where the information came to add the book, doesn't care where the information came for that particular book that it's adding. It simply knows that if you give it a bunch of data, it's supposed to make it a book and stick it on the shelf. Does that make sense in that kind of weird analogy? Yeah? Does it make sense? Okay. So once I've set up my controllers, models, and views, and I write all the code, because that's the fun part, that's the easy part, because once you structure it and you do your database tables, the rest of it comes really easy, because then you just start flying through writing all the code. And there may be a couple of hiccups along the way. There may be a couple of problems along the way, but that's always the case. That's when you spend the late nights writing code, not knowing why it works and why it doesn't work, which I have done. I'm married. My wife is one of the most patient people that you will ever meet. She has to be married to me. We have 3 kids, and she, I'll take a side note real quick. She's awesome because she watches the kids so I can travel the world and do all this sort of fun stuff. And she loves to travel, so she hates it that I get to go and have all this fun and she misses out. So I try to tell her, I say, oh, honey, it's so boring. I just sit in conference rooms all day. I don't do anything fun. It's horrible. It's not. She's really missing out. So she's really patient, and oftentimes I work really, really late, and I don't sleep very much at all. And sometimes she'll come out, and it's 3 in the morning. She says, you need to come to bed. You need to let that sit and come to bed. And so usually when that happens, and I get back up and I go at it the next day, it makes a lot more sense. So it's important. Take those breaks. Take those times away. And if you get stuck on something, I've heard it before, and I always said, yeah, whatever. It's true. If I walk away from it and I don't think about it, usually the solution kind of comes to me. And usually I come back and I look at it again, it's like, oh yeah, okay, well I could do this and make it work. So anyway, side note, side step, personal experience. So set up your deployment. So once you've got all your code and it's working perfectly and you think, man, this baby is ready to go, you need to figure out how you're going to release it and how you're going to manage those releases. And I've grown as I've gone along. Okay, I keep learning. Every day I learn something new. In fact, I'm really hoping that after this session and we're talking and exploring different things, I'm sure you guys will teach me something. You will help me learn something that I don't know, and I'm looking forward to that. It's important. When I started, I would write all the code, I would create the little package, I would manually zip it all up, and then I would manually put it up onto a web server, and I would manually move it to this and move it there. I don't do any of that anymore. I wrote a little script, and I'm happy to give it to you if you want it. It's Mac. But basically now I can go to the command line, and you don't even have to know command line to be able to run it. You just type in deploy, whatever, and it will package it. It will send it through FTP up to where it needs to go. I've moved past that now, so now whenever I make my push to a specific branch in my Git repo, it packages everything automatically for me. It distributes it. It notifies customers that a new version is out. It automates the whole thing. Because once again, I'm a lazy programmer. I want to make it as easy as possible. When I'm ready for it to be pushed, all I want to do is say, okay, I'm done. And that's it. And it does the rest of it for me. Okay? And that's really what it comes down to, is you want to make the most use of your time. You want to think through, okay, am I going to be, every time I write a new version or I update a new feature, am I going to be spending an entire day worth of time getting it all packaged and shipped and pushed everywhere and notify people? So, something to think about. And that's it. Then you can see your success. And it's easy. And you can start today. So, if I look, and at the bottom, in case you're curious, that's my Twitter handle. It's also my Facebook handle. It's also my GitHub handle. I'm trying to get the Skype handle, but I don't know who has it. So my Skype handle, in case you're curious, is David B. Hurley. My whole name all out. Everywhere else, it's D.B. Hurley. Definitely talk to me. Reach out to me if you have questions. I love sharing information, and that's not because I think I know it all by any means. Usually people come to me with a question, and I end up learning something. So I am all about learning. So if you have a question, definitely ask me, and I'm more than happy to take some time and show you how maybe I can help you make it work. If you are interested in the development series, lender.webspark. Uh-oh. Did I run out of time? Okay. Not yet. Okay. Lender without the E. Yes. Yes. Yes.
I saw some versions online that it seemed like they are not completed yet.
So the only thing on Lender that's not complete is some of the admin functionality. Okay. And I have paused it right now because I was evaluating how we're going to move forward. So if you're not familiar, how many of you have been using JController Legacy, JModel Legacy, and JView Legacy when you write code? Okay. How many of you have just used JController, the new JController, JModel, and JView? Okay. Lender uses the new JModel, JController, JView. As this was being written, as I was developing Lender, the discussion came up of maybe we need to roll those back and use the legacy ones instead, because the legacy adds a lot of additional functionality. So just to give you a real, very quick, the difference between that. So JController is a very trimmed down controller. It has maybe 2-3 functions in it, and that's it. JController Legacy has a lot of functions that you may or may not use. Well, the thought was, okay, we need to make the code as clean as possible, and we use JController. But then what happened was people are using all those additional functions. They're using more than just this trimmed down version, and so as a result, they were duplicating code. Because now it's not in the base, so when you're extending that class, you had to add all those functions into every single one of your controllers. And it was a nuisance. And so the question was, okay, so maybe we took that a little bit too far, a little bit too fast, and we need to reevaluate, and maybe we just need to clean up JController Legacy and move that back to JController. So as that discussion is going on, and in the PLT, we're discussing how we want to best handle this now because we have both systems. I paused finishing this up because I want to make sure that I give the best information possible. But if you have questions about it, email me or Skype me or tweet me, and I'll definitely answer any questions you've got along the way. This is what I'd recommend at this point in time. So it's on GitHub. You can download a sample of it. Remember, this is not a full-fledged, everything is perfect component. You can actually go to the bottom of each of these pieces and you can see where development was at that point, because what I did was I tagged it in the Git repo at each step. So you can download just the files for step 0 and just the files for step 2, and you can see how it looks at each piece during the process, because really the goal is that you're not writing this system. You're writing your own and using this as an example of just coding methods. I follow a lot of the same principles as far as writing my database tables. I kind of define how I'm doing each of those. I look at my install files, and I kind of go through and give an outline of what each piece is doing. So this is the takeaway here. If you really want to go into developing a component, you'll want to look at this site, look at the magazine articles, because honestly, in an hour session, there is no way I was going to be able to write a full component or even get into the depth of all this coding that's involved. So these are some resources that you can use to help you along that way. Yes?
I have a question in general about this component.
Yes?
For instance, if you would like to include some new functionality, like a book gets returned, but it's damaged, and you have to put it in the system that it's damaged,
Yes.
and the person who returned it has to pay a fee or something.
Yes.
In which part of the component would you add this functionality? Is it with the book or with the user, or what sort of controller would you create?
That's a good question. So the question was, okay, so what if I want to look at the sample component, which in case you haven't seen, it's a book lending system. So basically, I just had to think up something that we could possibly use as a sample component. So basically we've got books, we've got users, we've got wish lists, and we've got reviews that we're tracking, and then we have cross-reference tables between all of them. And so basically books can be lent from between people. And so the question was, well, what if I wanted to extend that functionality and say, okay, well, this book was damaged upon return, or I want to charge the user a fee because of the damage on this return. Where does that functionality get added into this type of a system? And it's a really good question, because really what it comes down to is a common question that you're going to have. It's not so much that the code itself is tricky. The part that I focus on, the part that I love to get involved with the most, is the logic flow. Where does it fit most appropriately so that it makes the most sense to the user? And how do I write this code in a way so that the end user, who's probably not a developer or a coder, understands and can use it effectively? So if I'm looking at damage to a book, okay, who's going to record that there was damage to the book? It's going to be the person that accepts the book back. Is the person that's accepting the book back going to note that the damage is on the book or that the damage is related to a person? More than likely what I would do is I would extend the book, and I would include another field on the book it would actually probably be a cross-reference table. I'm thinking on the fly here. It would be a cross-reference table between the book, the lender, and the quality. And then what I could do is I would, in the admin panel, I'm just thinking on the fly, so you have to forgive me. In the admin panel, I would create a list of options. Pristine, minor damage, severe damage, unusable. Okay, so then I've got options. And what that means by doing it in the admin panel like that, what I could do is I could add more later. If all of a sudden I realize, I want to have missing page 1 all the time because some jerk keeps ripping page 1 out of every book I lend him. So I want to put that as an option. You can extend it. I hate hard coding. Don't hard code values into your code, because some point in the future you're going to want to change it and it's going to be a pain. If you ever think it's going to be an option, make it something that's configurable in the admin panel. So just real quick, side note from that, everything I put in the admin panel is config stuff. I don't use the admin panel for managing books. I don't use the admin panel for any sort of the functionality of the component that I'm doing. I only use the admin panel of Joomla for configuration options. It makes more sense that way. It's more logical. The admin panel is configuration. The front end is where everything handles and happens at. That means I don't have to give anybody access to the admin panel, because all that is the config setup stuff anyways. So I would set up options in the back end for the book type, for the book quality. And then what I have is a cross-reference table, so that when I check that book back in, I can then select the quality of the book. So that's going to be in the view, and it's going to save to the book model. And when the book model goes through my save function, it's going to say, okay, when it gets to this field of my form that I'm processing, book quality, I'm going to route that save into the cross-reference table. And at that point, I'm going to save in the cross-reference table the book ID, who borrowed it, and the quality of the book. And then I could perform actions on that quality. Okay, if it's, damaged, then it needs to run to something else. And so if I'm going to then include functionality as far as charging them, I would consider that probably a separate function. I would separate model altogether, because that's going to be a more complex system, right? It's not just a little bit of code. It's not just the quality of a book. You're going to have to handle fees, payments, successful payments, and all that type of thing. All of a sudden, that's probably a full model worth of that data that I've got there. But that's how I'd run it. Oftentimes when I'm handling relations between tables, and some people have said it's a bit confusing, but I think for my sake, it tends to make it more logical to me, is if I'm performing an action on a person and I'm in the book model, then I call the person model and I run the action for that. I don't create a function about people on the book model. Does that make sense? If I'm getting information about a person, then obviously I want to get that from the person model. I don't want to put a function call to the person's database and grab data directly from the database on the person in the book model. I keep them always functionally separate. So I have all of my functions related to people in the people model, all my functions related to books in the book model. I keep them separated out like that completely. So anytime I see a function that says get people, I know that I should be looking on my people model, and that's where that get people function is. Make sense? Okay. So, are there other questions that I can answer for you? Because really, I know I'm probably out of time. I really want to just get any questions that you've got about component development. I may not have the perfect answer, but I can sure try. Yes?
Is the PDF kind PHP in the view still possible now?
PDF as a view in Joomla?
In the view?
That one is really hard. I always have clients that want PDF output, and I usually try to discourage them from it. And instead I push them to a print view that they can save as a PDF, because the browser handling of creating the PDF itself is so much more convenient than me trying to actually create PDF. I cannot promise you this, but I think that you cannot create the PDF anymore directly within Joomla. I think we took that function out altogether because it's such a headache. It was so much problems with it, and the images within articles, trying to put that into the PDF, it's a nightmare, because you have to columnize everything out all the way for the whole page, and it was just so much of a nuisance that I think we said, you know what, you output your raw data format and then print, use your print layout. So. Other questions? Yes?
I have the challenge to store files in my Joomla site, but they should be stored in a secure way. And I would prefer those files to be stored in the database, because then I can be 99.9% sure that they are secure. The extensions I find for handling documents or program code or whatever always store these files on the file system. And then they somehow twerk and do something so that the Joomla ACL can manage the access to those files. But I always manage to get access to the files without using Joomla ACLs. Either I have a user account and I store the link that I get. So when I'm not allowed to use the Joomla front end anymore, I can still use the link and access the files, etc., etc. So my question is, how would you go about developing a component that should manage objects, PDF files, Word files, Excel files, programs, whatever, in your Joomla site as a repository?
Okay, that's a good question. So the question was, what's the most secure and effective way to manage a file system of downloadable assets within a Joomla website? Is that a good summation?
Yes.
Okay. First of all, and this is personal opinion here, so you can differ with me and it doesn't hurt my feelings at all, I would never store a file in a database. That's a massive storage load. That makes my database size enormously huge. And I've had lots of experience with the databases just so bogged down because it's megs and gigs of data because people have stored image files in the database that I would never go that route. But I do completely understand the problem that you're looking at facing. And the way that I would suggest solving that is I always put my document repository above my public root access level so that it cannot be browsed directly. Okay, so immediately by taking it out of your public root, out of www, it's impossible to get to that file except through the actual system itself. Okay, dynamically generate the links to those files. So now, if it were me, what I would do is in my database, I would have my file name, my file path, and a hash. So then every file is a hash file. So the file name that's actually in the database is what's going to display on the page, but the actual file name that's living on the file that's above my document root is a hashed file name. So now all of a sudden I no longer know what the name of the file is unless I can remember a base64 encoded string, which I doubt you can. And I can't access it directly anyways because it's above my root. So now what I have is I can display a nice pretty file name from within my extension. And so yes, you will have to make sure that your ACL is set up so that you cannot get to wherever you're saving that link to the file. But then on top of that, when you click the link, it's going to have to be pulled from your file system by your component, which means that you have to have written your component in a way so that you're checking again that access. So it gives you a double fail-safe. First of all, they had to get to the link successfully through Joomla ACL. Second of all, the onus, the responsibility is on you as the creator of that component to double check and make sure that whoever is requesting that file has access to view that file. And then the program, the component, goes and grabs the appropriate file and presents it to the client as a download. And even when you present it to the client for download, you restore the file name to the file. So what they download is named whatever they expect to see. At no point in time do they ever really know what that file name existed as it was on the server. Does that make sense? And they never know the location of it. They can't get to it. So.
It might be a bit confusing, so therefore I take a bit the same approach, but
Yes.
I take the file name and I put the NJ5 hash just after it. So if my client has a problem, I still can find the original name by the front part of it. And the last part of it is just that people can't just guess it.
Okay, but the essence is that I cannot type something in the address bar of my browser to get access to that file, right? Because if I can use the address bar to bypass the ACL or the module...
There's no way to bypass the ACL because it goes through a component. It's not a direct path to a file.
Okay.
The file does not live within the public root. So there's no way to type in...
The address line has some component or whatever that is activated.
It has, yes.
And that part checks whether the user is
Yes.
allowed to access
Exactly.
the security.
It's absolutely impossible to type something in my address bar and get to a file that's above public root. That file has to be retrieved by the component. Any other questions? Am I out of time? 10 minutes. Sweet. Any other questions? Ask me anything. Yes?
You told about deployment script, which you wrote yourself. What about tools like AND or Thing?
Yes. Okay, that's a good point. So I mentioned that I wrote a simple little deployment script that I use, first on my personal computer side and then second from a server side. There are also some great development tools like Ant or Thing, which you can use to create those deployment scripts for you. I didn't go into those in detail right here because they're a bit more complicated and they're a bit of a pain to set up. But if you have the time and you want to look at them, it's PHING Thing, and Ant just ANT. They're both great deployment script opportunities, and I have used both of them in production environments in the past. Because of the bulk that's brought along with them, sometimes it's easier, more convenient just to throw something other quickly. It's going to do just what you want it to do, and just the bare basics. Now what I actually do is I have an entire build process that runs. You can use Jenkins. If you're open source project, you can use like Travis. These are continuous integration tools so that every time I make a push to a branch, tests run automatically on it to make sure that it doesn't fail. It's all automated. And then anytime that I push from a development branch to my master branch, when it pushes to master, it again runs all of my tests. And then it also, if it passes all the tests successfully, from there, it will then generate all of my build files. It will build out the files and it'll distribute them through SSH to my repositories on my various servers where my members could have access to download them from. So at this point, it's all automated. But the key thing there is incorporating testing into that process. Using unit testing. How many of you are familiar with PHP unit? Okay. If you're not, I'd highly recommend it. It'll save you hours and hours of time later on. It's a little bit tricky to learn. It will take you a little bit of time. So I'm not going to lie to you and say it's the easiest system in the world. PHP unit is a little bit tricky to learn, but it's extremely important because what you can do is you can set up functional tests and unit tests for every function in your code. And you can test that if I give this function this information, this is the information I expect out of it. And if it doesn't work, the test will fail and you'll know that you have a bug in your code. And it helps out tremendously because as you build your component, you'll end up with a lot of functions, a lot of classes, all these different things all over the place. And what's going to happen is one day you're going to go back and you're going to make a change to the book model. And you're going to think, okay, it works, it looks good because I'm fixing this bug, this one little problem. But what you've done is you've changed something that now is referenced by 30 other things still, and you only checked one of those things for that specific bug. And now you've got 29 other places that are still using what was a buggy code before, and it was working, and now you fixed it for one bug, and you may have broken 29 others. So it's important that you have some sort of testing in place so that you don't physically have to go and check all 29 other places and make sure that you're getting the right result every time. And I learned that the hard way. Yes?
For the people who don't use PHP unit testing, could you recommend some debug methods you use, like xdebug or maybe something else?
My personal favorite is using the developer tools that are within the browser itself. Oftentimes, going through the component, errors will be thrown. The toolbars, the tools that are available directly within down here are really, really super useful. How many of you use the developer tools like in Chrome? Okay. It's just too easy. I mean, it's just too nice, especially when you're looking at like your network requests. So every AJAX call, it's going to show down here. And if it doesn't return anything and you don't know why it doesn't, down here it'll turn red and you can click on it and you can actually see what happens. I live down here. For some reason, my stuff never works with the AJAX calls. It takes me forever to get them working the right way. So tools like that are super useful. A couple of my developers use xdebug, and they swear by it and they love it. I personally just like logging everything to console. So down here I can follow on the console, and I can see as I hit different points, stuff's coming out, and I can keep track of it that way. So that's a quick and easy tool, and that's a really simple one to get started using. It's really handy, too, from a perspective of being able to go into your elements and being able to highlight things and track down exactly why it's not wrapping correctly from a visual perspective or something like that. Plus, you can change things on the fly, of course. So, I don't know if that's gonna. Yeah. So, any other questions? Yes.
We have a component to manage our products on the website, and we can manage this in the back end and displays in the front end. And every product has more views, description, details, downloads. And we have for every downloads. We have a big menu, and it's not fun.
No, you can probably be handling all of that with your routing file. You should be able to simply create your top level. You only really need the top level to get into the component, and then the specific identifier for the piece that you need. And then everything else you should be able to dynamically generate. But if it's a view layout where you're viewing all of your products, then you really only need the top level and that action. And then everything else should be dynamically generated. And all those other pages should be handled dynamically based off of your identifier. I may need to see or talk with you specifically about it to get a better handle. But I guess, so the question was, do I need to create a complex menu structure to point to every single page or product within my specific listing, or is there a way to dynamically generate that? Is that good sum? So I would probably recommend that anytime that you find yourself creating specific item links to every single item for whatever reason, you're probably doing something wrong. Because once again, I'm a lazy programmer, and I don't want to have to create 100 menu links. I want to be able to create one menu link and have it do 100 things. So the goal here is to put all of the hard work, make it done by the system instead of by you. So my guess is, without seeing it specifically, if you're creating a whole bunch of menu links to get to individual items and you're going to each one uniquely, you can probably find a way to do that programmatically instead. Because again, you would need a unique identifier if you want to link to a specific item. But otherwise, anything else that you need, you should be handling programmatically with the code instead of with the menu structure. But I'd love to talk with you later and get a better feel for that. I have 2 minutes left. Any last minute, one question? Anybody, one more question? Yes.
All right.
Oh.
If you use ACL in your component and you need your special permissions, for example, is it the only thing you have to do is to put it in an XML file, or is there any additional thing you have to do when you create components?
Good question. So the question is, okay, I want to extend. Yeah. So the question is, I want to add access control into my specific component. Is there anything more that I need to do besides adding the XML file? And yes, there is. You actually need to, first of all, you want to build out exactly what you want to give permissions to. You want to define the roles that you want to give that permission to. And then you actually have to wrap the code in that permission check. So you have to check your permissions and against a specific level in your code